there are all different ways to solve quadratic equations. Well, not all different ways, but there's multiple ways. So the first one we're going to look at is called the zero product property, and that's by factoring. So if you have the product of two expressions, a and b, and it equals 0, that means that a has to be 0 or b has to be 0. So you can use that by factoring. So if you have x plus 3 times the quantity x minus 7 equals 0, that means that x plus 3 has to be 0 or x minus 7 equals 0. So if you can factor a quadratic and set the expressions equal to 0, then it's an easy, quick way of solving a quadratic. So to solve by factoring, what you need to first do is, in order to use a zero product property, you have to get one side equal to 0. So I'm going to do x squared plus 7x minus 18 equals 0. Now I'm going to factor this into x plus 9 and x minus 2 equals 0. After that, you set each one of these expressions equal to 0. So then I'm going to get x equals negative 9 and x equals 2 as my answer. So set one side equal to 0, and then factor, and then set each factor equal to 0. So this one, I'm going to set one side equal to 0, so it's 2x squared plus 4x minus 6. And then I'm going to factor, and this one I can factor out a greatest common factor of 2. I can also, I can also factor this part, this trinomial. This can factor into x plus 3 and x minus 1 equals 0. And then I'm going to set each one of these factors equal to 0. I don't set 2 equal to 0 because 2 doesn't equal to 0, so I'm just going to have x plus 3 equals 0, so x equals negative 3, and x minus 1 equals 0, so x equals 1 when I solve. And then the last one, I'm going to get one side equal to 0 again, so 16x squared minus 8x equals 0. Factor out a greatest common factor of 8x. So now I have 2x minus 1 equals 0. So I'm going to set this equal to 0 and I get x equals 0. I set this equal to 0 and I get x equals 1/2. So solve by factoring means you need to get one side equal to 0 and factor. Solve by factoring, finding square roots. So the only way you can solve by square roots if there's not a b term. So there's not a term that just only has x in it. So what you're going to do is you actually want to get x squared by itself. So you're going to add 25, then divide by 4, and now you're going to take the square root of both sides. That's the inverse of squaring, is square root. So this answer is the square root of 25 over 4, which is the square root of 25 divided by the square root of 4, so it's 5/2. But remember, if you have x squared equals 25/4, you can actually have two answers. You can have positive and negative 25 or 5/2. So don't forget about writing the plus or minus. And the next one, I divide by 3. So I have x squared equals 8. Take the square root. So x equals plus or minus the square root of 8. So remember, you can break down the square root of 8 as 2, 2, 2. So it's going to be 2 root 2. Don't forget to put the plus or minus. And the last one, you're going to add 1/4. Take the square root. So x equals plus or minus the square root of 1, which is 1, over the square root of 4, which is 2. Okay, this one I'm going to link up and show on a graphing calculator with a video, but to solve by a table or graphing, what you want to do first is get everything on one side and have a function y equals x squared minus 2x minus 4. Then what you're going to do is you're going to put this in your graphing calculator down here, and you're going to look at, this is not the same parabola, but you're going to look at where the zeros are, where it crosses. These are your solutions. So the calculator buttons that you're going to press is you're going to do second calc over here, second trace, and you're going to actually do the left bound and the right bound of this 0, and the left bound and the right bound of this 0. On a table, you're going to have an L1, L2 table, and you're looking for a sign change. So let's pretend that these are our numbers for the x's, and these numbers are the y's, or the L2's. And so what you're doing is, if this one's a negative, negative, positive, positive, negative, you're looking at the sign changes. So if you're going from a negative y to a positive y, that means that you're crossing the x-axis. So there has to be a solution in between 2 and 3. If you're going from a positive to a negative down here, it means you're also crossing the x-axis. So whenever you see a sign change from negative to positive or positive to negative on your table, you know that there's a 0 close by. Or if you just see a 0, if you see that there's a 0 right here, that means that x equals 5 is the 0. If you see y is 0. So right here, this is already in y equals, so you'd put in y equals x squared plus 1/2 x minus 1/4.